All right, I'm going to open this up in a quick word of prayer here. Then we're going to dive in. I'm trying to keep this phone screen from locking while I'm praying, so that'll be interesting. Father, I thank you for this opportunity to preach to the ladies here at Iona. And God, I just pray that you would be upon it, you'd be on our hearts, that we would have a good time, and that you would speak to us about the deep matters of your heart that you want to speak to. Lord, bless this sermon. Anoint me to give it with the heart that you have for it, as you spoke it to me this week. And bless our hearts and our ears and our eyes to receive what your Spirit has for the church today. Pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. So, this is probably going to lock because I wanted to say something before I got to this. This sermon kind of grows out of my relationship with my wife too, but with my daughter, and just watching a woman kind of grow up in my presence, and the weight of that and the responsibility of that, and sort of crazy moments that I've had as a father have kind of been stirring me to look harder at my ministry and to question whether whether I'm giving enough, whether I'm focused enough on what women need in particular out of a ministry. So it really is an honor and a privilege to preach to the women here at this church. And sorry I don't do it more often, I guess. I wanted to start us out with a hymn of sorts. I'm going to call it a hymn. I'm not going to sing it. I'll spare you guys that. I'll just read it poetically. But it's fairly modern, and it's supposed to speak to the heart of women in the modern world, which is kind of heavy. So you might suddenly go, I recognize this song. You might not. I don't know. But here we go. I'm going to take a drink of water. So here we go. The snow glows white on the mountain tonight, not a footprint to be seen. A kingdom of isolation, and it looks like I'm the queen. The wind is howling like the swirling storm inside. Couldn't keep it in, heaven knows I tried. Don't let 'em in, don't let 'em see. Be the good girl you always have to be. Conceal, don't feel, don't let them know. Well, now they know. Let it go, let it go. Can't hold it back anymore. Let it go, let it go. Turn away and slam the door. I don't care what they're going to say. Let the storm rage on. The cold never bothered me anyway. It's funny how some distance makes everything seem small. The fears that once controlled me can't get to me at all. It's time to see what I can do, to test the limits, to break on through. No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. To let it go, let it go. I'm one with the wind and sky. Let it go, let it go. You'll never see me cry. Here I stand and here I'll stay. Let the storm rage on. My power flurries through the air into the ground. My soul is spiraling in frozen fractals all around. And one thought crystallizes like an icy blast. I'm never going back. The past is in the past. Let it go, let it go. I'll rise like the break of dawn. Let it go, let it go. That perfect girl is gone. Here I stand in the light of day. Let the storm rage on. The cold never bothered me anyway. You guys probably recognize it. If there's any little girls in your life, it's the Let It Go song from Frozen. So I wanted to read that. Let me see if I can pull something up as well. Is it going to give me a Bible reading app here somewhere? This is probably pretty close. This is also a very well-known one if you've ever been to like any women's ministry in the history of any church. Proverbs 31:10. An excellent wife who can find? She is more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack. She does for him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks after wool and flax. She works with willing hands. She's like the ships of a merchant. She brings food from afar. She rises while it is yet dark, providing food for her household, portions for the women in her house. She considers a field, she buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength. She makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out by night. She puts the distaff into her hands and holds the spindle. She opens her hands to the poor. She reaches out to the needy. She's not afraid of snow for her household. All her household are clothed in scarlet. That was the warmest cloth they had back then. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known at the gates. He sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing. She laughs at the future to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is upon her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household, and she does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, he praises her. He says, many women have done excellently, but you surpass all other women. For charm is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. And I was just kind of wanting to put those out. Thanks for letting me use your phone. I wanted to start out by throwing those two things out. The other day, I had my cousin was visiting his little daughter's over. She's younger than Maggie, so she's just a little thing, and she was singing Frozen. And every little girl. I'm not trying to pick on my cousin. Like every little girl that I know, pretty much sings that song. And it's one of the few Disney movies I probably have seen. I forget the exact situation. I feel like I was at somebody else's house and that was on, and then there was like dip over here, so I ended up eating too much dip and watching Frozen. It must have been sports or something in the other room. But I don't know. I was kind of saddened when I watched that movie because it starts out with this little girl, right? Two sisters, and like what she's angry about in the song is basically she has magic powers and she hurts somebody on accident, and her parents are like, you have to be kind of isolated until you're figure out how to control yourself basically without hurting anybody. And then later on she gets accused of witchcraft, which part of my brain's like, that is witchcraft kind of, so technically that's legit. But anyway, she runs out of town and she forms an ice, magic, makes an ice castle for herself. That's what she's singing about. I'm gonna go and live away from everybody and my little cat. Like she's a literal ice queen, which is weird, like on the nose metaphor for something. It's a weird idea, but anyways, she has that scene, and the movie kind of is like this idea, like, oh, we're gonna make this a modern fairy tale. So there's like the Prince Charming, and at some point one of the girls gets her heart frozen. I don't remember all the details perfectly, but I remember they're like, oh, some sorcerer or something says she needs a pure act of love or something to come back. And so they're running to take her to Prince Charming, because obviously kissing Prince Charming is going to be the act of love that awakens her heart or whatever. And then they find out what Prince Charming wants to murder them. Marriage is just a trap to steal the kingdom from these women. So they run away from him. And then you go, oh, well, maybe it's this kind of dumb oaf guy that had been running around. Maybe he's the real Prince Charming. It's not, the pretty boy. It's this hardworking guy, but he's kind of been like adult the whole time. He's pretty dumb, and you're like understandably screwing up all the time. And so you think, oh well, maybe she's gonna, I don't know, kiss him or something. I don't know, some sort of loving deed is gonna make it right. And then it turns out at the end, no, it's the sisters' love for each other that sets them free. And then at the end, there's no wedding or anything. It's just these two women are now going to rule the kingdom together. And the poor guy, I was like, really, like, at the end I was thinking, what are they doing with this guy? Because it was almost like, well, one sister is alone and she was singing that song kind of like the Ice Queen. She don't care about it, men apparently. But the other one was kind of into this guy the whole time, but she doesn't marry him. He's just sort of her boyfriend on the side. And yeah, I'm just talking about, I don't know, there's probably sequels by now, um but his job is to like bring ice into the kingdom. And I thought, how worthless is that when this girl can shoot ice out of her fingers? Like, what, we're gonna turn to your sister, like, cast some ice? Or am I gonna have this guy like sled with animals and drag ice from something? Like, this guy has, like, he's the most, you know, unnecessary person in this whole story. And I watched it and I don't know why, you go, well, I don't know. There's some part of me that thinks I don't want my daughter setting her goal on that. And I couldn't really even put it in the words necessarily why that was the case. Um, but I began thinking, like, where do these, where do these movies come from? Why are we stirred by them? Um, and I know with guys, there's like a certain formula. There's movies, and every guy likes them. Be like The Godfather or Braveheart or Gladiator, and it's like every guy will be like, yeah, that's the movie right there. And there's just something, it's about being a hero and standing up, and you can go to a little boy and you can tell it could be Spider-Man or whatever, but it's the same thing, putting the fire in their eyes. There's something about being a man that even as a little boy you can watch a story and say, that's what I'm supposed to be chasing in my life. And you connect with it. There's some part of you that says, drink this in. It's wisdom, our God-given conscience, our God-given ability to find truth, I think, is in play. And we've done a lot of stuff with that in our men's group, where we'll look at various things and some of its archetypes. We go through different things like that. I haven't thought too deeply about it with women until Maggie's gotten a little bit older, and we'll be watching things and watching how she'll react to a cartoon. Lately, she's been calling me Doc because that's a dinosaur on a show she likes, and he's like a very side character on this show, but he's an old dinosaur that rescues a girl dinosaur, and she just, one episode, one off, she grabbed it, and that's all she wants to do all day. His dad, be Doc, oh no, something's coming to get me, fight it off, scoop me up and run me to my bed and put me in my bed and cover me up and protect me. And there's just something in her heart that sings to that. And there's something there when I think when women watch a romantic movie, and guys will make jokes about it. How many times have we watched this Hallmark movie or something? We know it, it's very predictable. Of course, action movies are very predictable too. It's what there's a reason for it, right? There's something, there's lessons, there's truths that are being touched on. And even if you can't quite get them to a conscious surface level to decode all the truth in it and make it useful to yourself, it's still there under the surface. And there's something about just touching that thing that goes, yep, there's something right here. There's something that awakens part of my heart when I watch this, when this story hits me. And it's there. It's in all those, Snow White and the Seven Dwarves and Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella. All these stories have these things in them. And I think nowadays we're getting to a place where we're afraid to say, what is a man? What is a woman? There's not supposed to be any difference. And I think a lot of times what happens is we take wisdom that's at our fingertips and we throw it away. And I could go into Psalm 31 like a million people have done. I could take apart the song from Frozen if I wanted to do that, I guess. I don't really. But really where my heart kind of went was to two stories kind of at random. And I haven't seen the Disney version since I was a kid. I just looked up I Googled it and looked up, like, what's the oldest versions of these stories? And I looked up Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty, kind of just following God with it and talking to him about, like, what is it here that's meaningful? What is it why does the world want to get rid of these stories? Why does it want to put these stories forward? What is attempting to be swept under the rug here was kind of where there's something here. There, for some reason, to think about it, like every 4-year-old girl who's seen like Sleeping Beauty or something goes, I like this. That's weird. It's like there's something there where it's like, what is it? What did they bump into in telling stories over 1,000 years that resonated, you know? And why are we trying to sweep it under the rug today? So I was gonna do Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and then I was gonna do um, the story of Tobias and Sarah from Tobit, the book of Tobit, but I didn't have time. It's crazy. It was Thanksgiving this week. If you guys didn't know, I'm sorry to say that Tobit got the axe. So we're I was gonna bring it a little closer. I'm gonna talk about scripture a little bit, but we'll talk about other things as we go through it, I'm sure. But I wanted to talk about these stories and um, and how I think a lot of times there's wisdom in the older generations that's being passed down, and for whatever reason, sometimes a small group of jaded people in our culture can shame everybody out of receiving that wisdom or using it. um, I see it a lot. um, I see it with my wife, and she's a stay-at-home mom and all that, and a lot of times there's some shame that's thrown at a woman making a more traditional choice like that. um, and just in general, not even to put it in the one pocket like that, but in a lot of areas, if you're kind of going, well, this is the more traditional form of marriage, or this is the more traditional way of raising your kids, there's a lot of shame thrown at that by people. And I'm like, why? Like, you're free to do anything but the old way? Like, how does that make sense? And I think a lot of times it just comes down to injury. There's like these Hallmark movies that sometimes my wife will get me to watch a Hallmark movie or whatever, like a Christmas, whatever. And the thing that's crazy is, like, I've noticed since like when I was a kid and my mom was watching stuff or my sisters would be watching stuff. We had one TV. It was like, okay, what are you going to watch? I've watched The Sound of Music more than any man should. Let's just put it that way. But we would be watching these movies back in the day. Nowadays, like all the rom-coms and stuff they put out, like, they don't end right, in my opinion, and also in my wife's opinion. Like, they never really say I love you to each other, or they never get married. Like, usually it's like, we're going to keep trying this out. It's like there's some political correctness that says, well, they can't just fall in love at the end of this weekend and get married and live happily ever after, because life doesn't work that way. And who's saying it? It's like, not most women. Most women would be like, I'd like this better if they, you know, if they got married at the end. That would be a nicer story. That's all the great movies we like from the past. But there's a small group of jaded women who are like, life isn't like that. And what are they out of injury or something, right? They're like, well, I fell in love once and the guy was a jerk. And so it doesn't work like that. There's no such thing as that. And so there's like a desire to smash the fairy tale because that person was injured. And so there tends to be like little groups of angry people in every group that kind of try to ruin it for everybody. I remember this one time we were in Africa, and there was this we lived, like, we were working with the Baka people. Next door to them, like, there would be a Bantu village almost next to every Baka village, just two of them everywhere you go in the jungle. And the Bantu were a different people group, and they were very patriarchal by definition. So the men were the head of the house. There's no question about that. And inheritance was patrilineal, it was from father to son. Very, very common form of society. And there was a lot of negative stuff on top of that was happening because the economy had been bombed out. That's what happens. You start shipping, like, there's a lot of like Chinese companies. They're like, oh, our rice went bad. It's past its sell date, so we're going to sell it to Africa, pennies on the dollar, and make some money off of it instead of throwing it away. And so if you flood the market with all this cheap food, like, if you're a Bantu farmer, you were having a hard time anyways, because you're using like a horse to like do 2 acres of land and trying to sell that. Now you got rice coming in pennies on the dollar. You can't compete. So bad economy, lots of alcohol and drugs being introduced for the first time. They hadn't really been around that. So there's drunkenness, there's domestic abuse, which was really kind of the first time in that culture, which is not uncommon. It's like the Native Americans at the turn of the century, kill all the buffalo. The guys are just sitting around penniless, and then you give them a bunch of booze, and it's not a good mix. And so, anyways, they needed help. They needed a lot of help on a lot of different levels. And so there would be people that would come through and try to help these groups. We were doing our thing. And I remember this lady that went through, and she was with the World Health Organization, the WHO. And so she came through, and she was very woke, I think you could say. She was from the Netherlands or something. She was a lesbian. Um, she looked, she had the haircut. It wasn't, you guessed it before she told you anything. But and her goal was, I'm going to come and I'm going to help these backwards women. Like, she probably wouldn't have said it that way, but in her mind, they were enslaved in a literal patriarchy, and she was going to come and set them free. She was going to be their liberator, and she was going to come and she was going to educate them and get her idea was like, let's get the literacy up, let's give all these women jobs, let's raise up their daughters, they'd be self-sufficient, and that way they can lead these men when they finally wise up and decide to, essentially. And there was domestic abuse. There were things that she could point at and be like, yeah, I don't know if they didn't really have that before that. I think the alcohol is the problem, but yeah, okay. And so she went in there, and she had the confidence that a Western person has, who's been saying something very Western to Westerners for a long time. You go over and you say it to someone who isn't Western, they go, why would I believe that? And you go, I don't know. I've never had to really argue it before. It's just like, of course, this is the right thing, And so she went into this group of women, and she's trying to tell them how great it's going to be to get, to have a second job and have all this money, and you can tell your man to back off, and you can go and work, you could leave, you could be single mothers and go off on your own even. And she's telling them all this stuff, and they have this glazed over appearance. And then finally a lady, kind of like, the head lady there, starts asking her some questions. And she wasn't going to be open about being a lesbian. That would be a very bad idea. They would have just thrown her out. That's a big no-no over there. So she wasn't going to say anything about that. But they were kind of like, are you married? No. Do you have kids? No. Are you close to your family? No. Who takes care of you? I have a job. I take care of myself. And they looked at, and she, like, there is this moment where they were just looking at her like, you don't have anything that we want. You've traded everything that we care about for these things, and you're asking us to make the same trade. And it wasn't even like we're not interested in. It was like she was a leper. They looked at her like, you are the worst, the thing that girls in our culture are afraid of, that you're going to grow up and be a spinster and have no kids and your family doesn't want you. Like, you are the nightmare that you have to go and work like a man to survive. Like they were, and it was heavy because she, like, you could tell this wasn't the first village this happened in. Like, she thought she was going to be a hero to these people, and village after village she heard the same thing. She's realizing it's not a conspiracy against me, it's just I'm completely wrong. And probably there's a little bit of these women are happier than any women I've ever met before, and they're dirt poor, and their kids sometimes die when they're 4 years old from malaria. I mean, there's a ton of, they're starving sometimes, and there is domestic abuse and drunkenness coming into their culture for the first time. There's a whole bunch of reasons to be like, you should be miserable. But they have this vibrant community of women and daughters and mothers that passing on traditions. And there's something, if you've hung out with tribal people, even when they're kind of screwed up, there's something about it where you go, I think we traded something for money. Like, we made some sort of Faustian devil's bargain to be like, we want to be rich with air conditioning. And we traded some things away that leave kind of a hole in people. Whether you're a man or woman, it's true. And so I think part of that was, anyway, she went off, and she was kind of, and I don't think she was a woman that cried very often. She was very kind of butch kind of lady, but she kind of sat on the log over here and was crying. And the women were like, did not care. And they were like, well, you thought you were better than us or whatever. And kind of the poignant, poetic moment was when the old leader of the tribe, this old man, went over and sat, kind of put his arm around her like she was his daughter, and kind of tried to comfort her and say, maybe I can talk to them. maybe we can work something. And she was kind of like presenting herself falsely to the men. She was trying to sneak her way in here and then get access to the women and lead a rebellion almost against the men. And then here's this man, and this is literally the patriarch of this patriarchy. Like he is the tribal leader of the whole group. He's the man who's subjugating all these women from her whole understanding of things. And he comes alongside her, and it really is why is he different than the woman? Because he looks at her and he just sees a woman who has nobody to watch her back. There's no man to take care of her in this situation. As a father, he goes, this is wrong. If this was my daughter, I hope that the wisest, strongest man around would step up for her and help her do whatever she's trying to do. And so he can't, and there you could just see like she was very comforted, and like her computer was like malfunctioning at the same time. Like this is the enemy, these are the victims, like, but none of the labels were fitting right. And you could just tell like this is gonna, I don't know if it was like if she just shoved that, went home and shoved that away, or whether that made her ask some deep questions later on in life. But I think often in the West, what happens is we give women and men, I'm not talking about men today, but we give them a false bill of goods. Like these are truths, and these are lies, and nobody ever questions it until you're in a situation where maybe people are living completely different. You go, well, that's not supposed to work, and this shouldn't be a happy marriage, and these kids shouldn't be good in this situation, and is misogyny, or this is this, and then you get into the situation and then it's like, but it's not really. And I think there's a lot of that wisdom that's in these older stories that generation, probably your mother, your grandmother, your great mother, grandmother either watched or listened to these stories, and they had wisdom in them that they respected. And now in this modern generation where women, you can't even give a definition for what a woman is without it being offensive. I think that in some degree, even fairy tales are too dangerous. Like, don't tell those stories. They might touch a heart. They might stir somebody to do their own thinking. And so I just wanted to go through, we're going to go through two of these stories, but point out some of the wisdom that I felt the Lord was kind of stirring me on them. And I just thought it was kind of beautiful. And beauty is one of the big parts of these stories. So I wanted to take us back to look at Cinderella. And I'm not going to tell necessarily the Disney version of Cinderella. There's a lot that they edit over time, even before we started putting them in modern movies. But and there's a lot of different versions that exist side by side. So I'm going to kind of just go over it as it is. Obviously, the German Cinderella is a lot more hardcore than it's like the Brothers Grimm Cinderella's. People are getting their eyes plucked out by birds and stuff. It's a lot heavier. But I mean, back then, I think that it was like they respected these stories more as cautionary tales. They were supposed to tell you, they were supposed to speak of heavy things. They weren't bedtime stories for happy feelings. They were like, there's wisdom in these stories. So, you guys probably know the basic outline of Cinderella, but Cinderella is usually a story of a girl and her father and her mother. She's in a happy household. Her mother dies. That's a big part of the Cinderella story, is the good feminine in her life, the nurturing maternal feminine experience in her life is cut off suddenly. There is no mom. And then usually the story is that the father remarries an evil woman, right? The evil stepmother. And there's evil stepdaughters too, that become evil stepsisters. And either in the original stories, the father continues to be alive and he's just bamboozled. He just absolutely believes everything the evil stepmother says. And he eventually joins in with being mean to Cinderella and like treating her like crap. He just buys into it. He gets bamboozled. In more modern stories, he dies at some point, and then she's, both of her parents are dead. Now, from a psychological standpoint, a lot of psychologists would say this story works with people even when their parents are alive, because it's not really about your mother dies and then you have a bad stepmom. You don't have to have that experience for it to speak to you, because usually when you grow up, you're going to have an experience where, when I was a little girl, my experience of my mom was very joyful and wonderful. And as I got older, there were more and more times when she kind of seemed like a wicked stepmother rather than my mother. There were times as I became a woman where there was this antagonization between us, where there's tension between us, where she, even times when she was talking to my dad, and I was daddy's little girl and he was going to go along, but she went along and she pushed it the other way and bamboozled him from your perspective. So even in you would think that story would have to be very, it would only touch a certain audience, girls who had lost parents, or there was a divorce. Every girl, because there is a time when you realize, oh, there are women who are really on my side, like my mom when I was really young. And then there are times when women, they're supposed to be on my side. They're in my family. It might even be my mom. It might be an actual stepmom. It might be an aunt, a grandma, whatever. But they're not. Cinderella. Her name, that's what they call her. And it's really the idea that she's beautiful, but they're going to try to hide her beauty in the ashes. They're going to shove her into this ugly slavery position and hide all of her qualities. And this is going to happen from the people who should be her champions. They should be fighting on her side, but they're going to say, go clean the toilets and, you know, and scrape. Back then it was scraping out the firebox and you're covered in ashes and you smell bad. You smell like smoke all the time. And that's the image of Cinderella. It's really a story of what happens if people, like everybody in your life, tries to destroy your beauty. Like that's a very, like, I know that women, adult women, often have a very complex relationship with beauty because it's so traumatic in a lot of childhoods. But there's no question when you meet a little girl that the thing they want most in life is to be beautiful. I want to be beautiful. And this is the thing that'll warm their heart the most. I could tell my son all day long he's beautiful. Never going to register for him. He doesn't give a crap if the scar on his face, cool, whatever, no big deal. If I tell my son he's brave or he's courageous, he glows. And I can tell my daughter all day long, you're such a brave little girl. You're such a strong little girl. It's okay. I tell her she's beautiful. She glows. There's something there. And a lot of these stories are talking about what happens to your beauty when you go through life and it gets attacked. And Cinderella is a story about what happens when everybody in your life, especially when you're maybe just making the transition into being a woman, what happens when everybody in your life turns and tries to destroy the beauty? And they try to convince you it was never even really there. And they try to make you ugly. They tell you that you are, and they go after that beauty. And the story of Cinderella is the story of a young girl who says, it doesn't matter if the whole world calls me ugly. I'm not going to forget who I am. And I'm not going to forget the gift I've been given, which is beauty. I'm going to hold on to it. And it doesn't matter what they make me do. And it doesn't matter what horrible things I go through. I'm not going to pervert that beauty to fit in with them, or to, I'm not going to swallow the poison they're trying to feed. They're trying to tell me I'm ugly, I'm stupid, I'm fat, I'm whatever. They're trying to feed, and I'm not going to believe them. I'm not going to believe them, even though she's my stepmother and they're my stepsisters and they're supposed to have access. This is my sister. This is my mom. Even though they're supposed to have the access to put these judgments, I'm not going to accept it. I know who I am. And that's really the powerful story in the midst of Cinderella. If you remember, what happens in Cinderella is eventually there's this call that goes through the kingdom to come to the ball. The prince is going to choose a wife soon. This is the most powerful position for a woman in the kingdom. Marry the prince, be queen one day. There is no greater position in the world of women at this time than the position that's being interviewed for on that night. In the old stories, it's a 3-night ball. So 3 nights in a row, there's going to be dancing and eating and conversations and all this stuff. And she wants to go. She has every right to go. They're not going to let her go. In the old stories, what happens is they say you can go, and then they take a handful of lentils, like beans, and they throw them into the ash pit, and they say, if you can get all of them out, then we'll let you go. It's supposed to be an impossible task. But in the old stories, what happens is when Cinderella's mom dies, a tree grows up on her grave, watered by Cinderella's tears. And whenever she prays to God at that place, these two doves will come. That's why Cinderella has these birds flying around in the Disney movie. It's the birds of prayer. It's supposed to be petition and revelation coming from God. And so she'll pray for things, and it's not a fairy godmother in the original story, it's these birds of prayer that are really at work. But she'll pray for things. So the birds come and they collect all the seeds for her. There's a miracle. God intervenes and she meets the standard. What do? They take 2 handfuls of beans and throw it back into the fire. You got to find all that. And they keep moving the line. It's an important picture because it's saying that these women will act like you can become a lady if you meet my standards, but the standards are always impossible. And even if a miracle comes through and you meet their standards, they'll just move it and tell you to do it again. There's an image there that's supposed to resonate with a sense of frustration that a lot of young girls have in situations where there's women who are not really healthy. They did not go through childhood right. And for whatever reason, they want to smash the young girls coming up to make themselves feel better. And there's a male version of this, we call it like King Herod syndrome, where there's a guy and all he wants to do is smash. He might even smash his own sons. He does not want them to grow up to be competition. And there's something in a lot of women where they don't want to see young girls grow up to be strong young women because it's just competition. They don't want anybody angling for their jobs, essentially. Or even just they'll feel, I never had my chance, so why should you get your chance? People have negative reactions. Anyway, in the classical stories, and there's, like I said, it evolved over time, but usually there is a fairy or magical, fairy just meant magical back then, godmother. It's very interesting. Most people think about the fairy element a lot, but they don't think of the fact this is a godmother. A godmother is a woman you're not actually related to, but she's asked at some point to take a position of motherhood in your life as a backup for your mom in case your parents die or in case they fall away from God and they become bad people. She's still responsible before God to come along and be a good mother to you even when everything else falls apart. It's a role that women are supposed to have in their lives where there is some woman that's not actually related to you, but she takes responsibility for you to some degree. And she comes in and helps you even when maybe your family's not doing right by you. She'll come in and try to help. And so this is what the fairy godmother is, just like she's got magical powers. She's super helpful, right? But it's still a godmother. She's somebody who is a good maternal force in your life. She's the mother that God is putting in a situation where your mother is failing or you're slipping through the cracks. And so the godmother comes and she says, this is what we're going to do. There's going to be a spell, and you know the story with it. Sometimes it's a dress, sometimes the shoes are silver, sometimes they're glass slippers, sometimes the pumpkin turns into a chariot or into a carriage. The details vary, but basically, I'm going to dress you up like a princess and send you to this ball so you can go there and have a fair time and see if you can meet the prince. And we're going to send you out. Now, it's a very interesting thing because the whole story of Cinderella is that her beauty isn't touched through this whole situation. They dress her in ashes. They dress her in rags. They try to make her into something that can be ignored. And at the end of the story, essentially what the godmother is saying is inside, you're still absolutely beautiful. And in reality, she is on the outside. It's kind of like in those movies where they fix up the girl and she gets a makeover at some point. But from the beginning, this is a pretty girl. They just put her in overalls and slap some paint on her face. They're like, her eyebrows are perfect, but they try to make it look now. It's very much that situation. And so, but the godmother dresses her up like a princess. That's not what she is. It's what she could be. It's what she has the potential to be. Yeah, you guys are busted. Good, Danny. It's my son leading the charge. But anyways, what the godmother does in this situation is it's not only like the family here is looking at Cinderella and they're making her so much less than what she is. You should be a scullery maid, man. She's a noble woman. She shouldn't be cleaning out They have servants. They're just like, they're doing this to tear her down. And the godmother doesn't only restore, like, you're a noble woman. Go to this party. Dress her up more. She dresses her up like a princess because this is who she has the potential to be. You are good enough that you could marry that guy, that you could become queen, that you could be in this position of incredible power. You have what it takes. It's a vote of confidence even beyond where she is. And you can see it where it's like the bad people in the story are trying to make her less than what she is. And the good person in the story is saying, I'm not even looking at how awesome you are now. I'm looking at the possibilities of where this goes. So it's like sort of evil prophecy versus good prophecy to some extent there. And so in the story, Cinderella goes to the ball. Nobody recognizes her. She dances with the prince. In the original stories, all 3 nights she dances with the prince, and he's smitten. He's falling more and more love every night. And she has to leave. She leaves each time. She runs away. He wants to take her home. She won't let him. She'll slip off at some point. And this happens on all 3 nights. On the last one, the slipper gets left behind, right? This is the last little piece. And then he goes and he looks for her. A big part of that story at that end part is the idea that there's a testing that should naturally happen. Like, she's dressed up in her best to help this man see where she can go. But there's also reality. He has to be introduced to the reality that she's in now. And that's really symbolic of a glass slipper. Like, if you think, what would your foot look like in a glass slipper? I don't care who you are. It will look kind of gross. You squish a foot. You have the most beautiful foot in the world. You squish it into a glass slipper and you dance in it all night. And a little sweat in there. Your feet are getting ready. Your pinky toe gets that purple color after it's been squished in a shoe like that for a long time. It the very idea of it is pointing to, one, it's a glass slipper. It's only going to fit one person. So it's specific, but it's also warts and all. It's the reality of who she is. And it takes an act of courage in her beauty to come forward to him and say, identify me by, come out in her Cinderella, in the ashes and all, and stick her foot in that slipper is actually an act of incredible confidence and faith in her, in the gifts that God has given her and the beauty that God has given her. In the story also, it plays a role because in the original story, her sisters like cut off parts of their feet to try to fit their foot into the slipper. And it's a glass slipper so that you could see, oh, you cut your pinky toe off to get it in the shoe. So in the Brothers Grimm version, it's like that. And it's just, and again, it's showing the maliciousness of, there's women that are trying to steal your place. And they know they have they know they know they're not the girl with the glass slipper, but they will try to lie and steal that place. They'll cut off their own toe to try to get in there. And the maliciousness of that. There's really 2 big morals in the story of Cinderella. One is what we would maybe call feminine grace. And that's the idea. Let me put it this way. Let me see how I wrote that down. Don't want to do it out of order here. Oh, sorry. Must have skipped a page. There we go. Yeah, hang on. I want to cover all these. But one of the big messages of Cinderella is that beauty cannot be destroyed. Even though they did all these things to try to destroy her beauty, really the only way they could have succeeded is by convincing her she was ugly and she needed to stay in the ashes and to stop trying to go to the ball and stop trying to escape the trap. Just to accept this station was really the only victory they could hope to have in this situation, because they couldn't take away what God had given to her. They could only make her despise what God had given. She was beautiful, but they could convince her that her beauty isn't beautiful. They could make her hate what God has given her, whether that's her physical appearance or her virtues on other levels. One of the big virtues, you could say, that Cinderella shows is what we call feminine grace. It's different than what we would define as grace in the Bible. That's God's grace. That's different. Feminine grace really is I put it down here as the ability to show your beauty when you're judged as ugly. It's easy to be beautiful, and to believe in your beauty when everyone's cheering it on. It's another thing to have your jewels and your beautiful dress ripped off of you, be thrown into a cellar with rags, made to clean, made to be constantly called ugly, and to still stand in your beauty and still show that beauty and say, but they can't really touch that. They can't really take that away from me. That's not within their power. And that beauty is more powerfully displayed when it's in the rough, when people are trying to tear it down and it just won't collapse under the onslaught. So that's really a big picture that we have in Cinderella. I wanted to cover one other one. This is Sleeping Beauty, which is, people really don't like Sleeping Beauty nowadays, right? And it's worse. There are stories where it goes a lot farther than a kiss while she's asleep, which is weird. But if you study it, you realize where they're going with the Sleeping Beauty story. Um, in Sleeping Beauty, and again, there's a ton of different versions. But again, there's a young girl. She's born to a royal family. She is a princess, and she is born after they tried for a long time. They didn't think they were going to have a daughter. They finally have one. They're super jazzed. They throw a big christening party, and they choose 7 godmothers for her. And they're all fairies. They're magical people. Fairies aren't little Tinkerbell things in most of these older stories. They're magical, semi-human, semi-spiritual, kind of like angels almost. And so they pick 7, guardian angels to be her godmother, to be her godmothers to watch over her. But they make a mistake. There's one woman who gets slighted, and she becomes the evil fairy godmother in the story. And in the original story, there's this very strong vibe of a woman scorned. Somebody screwed up. Aunt so-and-so's pissed, and she's going to take it out on the daughter. The baby has nothing to do with it. The parents didn't invite her to the party, but she's angry and she's going to try to hurt the baby. And so the good fairy godmothers in the story, they go and they're giving her beauty and and a lyrical voice, and they're wishing patience, and they're giving her all these spiritual gifts essentially. The 7th godmother realizes this other lady she party crashed. This other fairy is pissed and she's going to do something crazy, and she says, I'm going to wait until the end. So I'll give my gift in case hers is bad. I'm going to wait to give my gift to try to offset that. And so what the spited woman does is she gets up and she says, I'm going to tell you what this young girl is going to do. She's going to grow up, and when she tries to weave the flax, and this is very old. There's in the modern stories, it's a spinning wheel. You go back a little earlier, it's a spindle. Eventually, it's just forming thread out of flax fiber with your hands. It's something that every woman would do in that culture. If you were not a little girl, as soon as you became an adult, you'd start making clothes. Even if you were a princess, you would do it. And so this woman's saying, as soon as she becomes a woman, as soon as she puts her hand to womanly work, she's going to prick her finger. And this would be something, in the original, it's getting a flax fiber under your fingernail, which would happen all the time if you did that. Not a big deal. It's a paper cut, small thing. She says the first time this happens to her, she'll die. Boom, she just curses this little baby. It's a horrible, spiteful thing. The little girl did nothing to her, but the family has offended her, and she's inherited this curse, essentially. And so this evil fairy godmother curses this young girl, essentially, that the moment she steps out to be a woman, she's going to be killed for it. She's going to get a minor injury, and it's going to kill her. Now, the good fairy godmother comes, the last one that held back because she saw that this lady was burning up. She comes and she gives a blessing. She says she's not going to actually die when this happens. No, she'll sleep for 100 years. Not age. She'll wake up afterwards to a prince, and everything will be fine. So she comes in and she gives this blessing that's it can mitigate the curse, but not completely get rid of it. And that's the setup for the story. So Sleeping Beauty, not a real name. I don't know what her real name changes from story to story. It's Aurora in the movies, but that's actually her daughter's name in the original fairy tales. But anyway, she is in this castle, and her father, of course, has burned like all the spinning wheels, tries to keep all the flax stuff away from, because he doesn't want her to get injured. He doesn't want the prophecy to be fulfilled, because even if she just sleeps for 100 years, that's it. She pokes her fingers, she's going to fall asleep, and they're both, her parents are going to be dead, her grandparent, everybody's going to be long dead by the time she wakes up. And so the story goes that at some point she sees a woman, because of course they still have to make clothes. So eventually she sees a woman making clothes, and she knows this is a womanly thing to do, and she tries to do it, and she gets immediately a little flax fiber stuck under her fingernail, exactly what said would happen, and she falls asleep, and they can't wake her up. And so they put her in bed in a chamber of the castle, and in the story, the good fairy godmother comes and she says, "You know what I'll do? I can tell that she's going to be very upset in the future that she doesn't know anybody. So I can't do anything about the parents, but I'll make all of her servants and her friends in the castle fall asleep too until she wakes up." And so everybody in the castle gets knocked out. Her parents move out of the castle to go live somewhere else, because this is a castle of sleeping people that's going to be sleeping for 100 years. And the fairy godmother makes this giant scary forest grow up around the castle to keep anybody from messing with the sleeping people in the castle for 100 years. There'll be all these monsters in the forest that keep them away from it. And so this is what happens. The forest grows up, her parents die, 100 years pass, and then here's Prince Charming, right? Here's the perfect guy for her. And in the original story, he hears the story of her and he falls in love just from hearing the story of this girl, maybe seeing a little painting of her or something. And he says, "I'm going to fight my way through this forest to get to her." And so he does. He fights his way all the way through the forest, and he gets into the castle and he finds her. And there are different versions of the story. One of them, he kisses her. In an old version of the story, he actually sleeps with her while she's unconscious and she has babies, and this whole thing happens. She wakes up when she has children, essentially. What happens in one of the more common versions of the story, he doesn't touch her at all. He just kneels down and he looks at her and she wakes up. When he looks at her with love, she wakes up. Now what happens is they get married then, because everybody in the castle wakes up. So they get the priest from the castle and they get married. And he lives in the castle. He spends a good amount of time there. He's still living at home. He doesn't tell anybody at home about her for a while because it would be dangerous for her. And eventually she has children. She has 2 twins. And she has this problem where she continues to fall into these stupors. It's like a leftover effect from what happened. She still has the thing stuck under her fingernail, and sometimes it will ache, and she will like fall into a stupor where she's partially asleep for days at a time. And this often happens while she's breastfeeding. And so she'll be breastfeeding. She's got twins here. She's always feeding a baby. And the baby will come off and she'll be just stuck like a statue or something. And the baby will suckle on her finger. And one day when the baby's suckling on her finger, sucks the little piece of flax out of her finger, and she's fully healed. She comes out of it. She never goes into it again. Shortly after this, in the story, the prince sort of ascends to the throne, and so he brings his wife. He goes, "Hey, everybody, I've been married to this woman in this secret castle for about 3 years. We have kids. I'm bringing them over. She's going to be queen now because I'm king." And he brings them over. And we find out the reason why he was hesitant to do this is because his mother is literally an ogre in the story, which you think like Shrek or something. In original, fairy tales, an ogre didn't have a particular appearance. An ogre was a cannibal. They weren't always recognizable at first as ogres. The female ogres are all that they call them ogresses, and they all had the same qualities. They were all very large, very powerful. They usually were in positions of power. They had manly attributes. They were a little bit masculine for women in their time period. And they would always eat women and children, not men. They went after young women and children particularly. And so the reason the son apparently had some sense there's something wrong with mom. I don't think she's going to handle this right if I tell her about this girl I married. So he keeps it a secret. Eventually, he's got to bring her out. She's going to be my queen, or they're going to try to marry me off to somebody else. But she brings her in, and she's the queen. The old queen is like the queen mother, right? She's getting put out the pasture. She's probably not going to like that. This is the new queen. The Sleeping Beauty is the queen. They have two small kids. Now, what happens is the first war he gets called off to, because he's a king, he's got to go out and fight. The first thing that happens is that ogre gets the mom distracted doing something. She says, oh, it's always something that has to do with your duties as the lady of the house. You have to go out to this village. You have to do this thing. You have to leave your kids with me. And so she has to leave them. And then she takes the kids immediately to the cook and says, cook up these children and I'm going to eat them. In some of the stories, she will try to cook them and feed them to the king. That's what she wants to do, is she wants him to devour the children. Sometimes she wants to devour them directly. But she takes the kids to the cook and tries to get the cook to kill and cook the children up. And in the story, the cook doesn't want to do that. So she hides the kids and she kills 2 lambs and serves them instead. And the ogre doesn't know she eats lambs instead. And then when Sleeping Beauty comes back, conks her on the head. There's a whole thing where she tries to get them all, to eat them all, and it doesn't happen. And Sleeping Beauty and the cook work together. The cook is a female cook, and they work together to expose the ogre to her son, the king, when he comes back, her husband, right? And so he has the ogre killed or whatever. You're a horrible person, gets rid of her. And that's the story. It's a much different story than maybe the story of Sleeping Beauty you've heard. And I could understand why people would be creeped out by the whole sleeping issue, especially when it's like, they did it poetically in the Middle Ages. They said they tasted the first fruits of love while she was asleep or something. It was like, she's sleeping with a girl that's asleep? That's gross. That's rapey. And even the kiss while it's asleep, you never met her before. It's weird. But we're not looking at the story in the way that anybody in the past would have done it. They would have been looking for metaphorical meaning. Like, they wouldn't have just said, oh, there's magical birds that help Cinderella. They would understand these are symbols for prayer, for devotion, for things. They would understand these are all symbolic. And the story of Cinderella of Sleeping Beauty is really a perfect accompaniment to the story of Cinderella. Cinderella is the story of beauty can't be destroyed. They can't take it away from you. No matter what they've done to you, they haven't been able to do any harm to that directly. They can't actually get at what makes you beautiful. They can't take away the gift God gave you. God gave it to you. You can throw it away. You can do things to your gift, but they can't do it to you. And the story of Sleeping Beauty is sort of the other shoe that falls, because the story of Sleeping Beauty is really the story that beauty can be harmed, not destroyed, but it can be driven into the unconscious. It can be knocked out and taken out of commission, where you're not walking in beauty, you're asleep. That part of you is asleep. Beauty is asleep and it needs to wake up. And how do you wake it up? The idea that there's a scornful woman that sabotages a young girl at the moment where she's trying to learn how to be a woman. That's the imagery. We don't do flax. That doesn't make sense to us immediately, but you would understand this is like a girl stepping up to do the first thing as like a woman. I don't know, it's like hosting a big meal like helping out with Thanksgiving for the first time. I don't know what it would be in your particular family situation, but it's something it's a line. I'm becoming a woman. And there's somebody who sabotages her. She wants to kill her, but what happens? She gets a minor injury. Anybody else would look at it and say it's not a big deal. Yeah, they mocked her a little. They made fun of her for screwing up the pie. They said, what kind of wife are you going to be? They said it's a minor injury. But from that moment on, beauty slept. And it would sleep for 100 years. That beauty disappeared, that something else took its place as the primary virtue. I'm useful. I can do a lot of stuff. But that dream of beauty from being a little girl, that disappeared somewhere, got hidden away, locked away. And in the story, what wakes it up again? Marriage, a guy showing up. There's 2 images. One is childbirth, becoming a mother. and one is the love of the young man. These are the two things that reawaken beauty. Even in a young girl who's been traumatized by women in her family, she's given up on the idea of being beautiful. I don't need that. Maybe she's a little spinsterish at some time, but then what happens? There's a young guy who looks at her that way. He sees beauty she doesn't even believe she has anymore. And what does it do? It kind of wakes up the beauty again. But it's not sufficient in itself. Later on, what it's trying to pull her back to sleep. Sleeping Beauty is trying to get why the injury's still there. And what does it get sucked out by? A baby. The love of babies, being a mother, is another image. And this is the idea. It's not literally someone getting knocked out. It's the idea that your sense of beauty, who you're supposed to be as a woman, can be injured. It can be driven underground inside of you into a sleeping area of your consciousness. And it's going to be the love of people outside, specifically of your husband and of your children, that can call that back to the surface and allow you to rediscover that part of yourself that maybe you haven't known since you were a little girl. So really, it's the idea, the moral of the story of Sleeping Beauty is beauty can be injured. Beauty can be rendered unconscious. It can be knocked out, but it can also be revived. It must be revived. It's something that needs to happen for the story to end the right way. And so I just wanted to I broke these down into 4 points, and we'll just cover them real quickly. But I think if you look at this, you can go, wow, we can get these 4 points from two fairy tale stories. How much wisdom is there out there for women that's probably that you're being turned away from just for political sake? It's just someone's political correctness. You're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to define that. That's too old school. And the fear of not fitting in with a minority of women, like that woman from the WHO. That's the fear that keeps most women from really receiving the wisdom of their ancestors and the women that went before them. So let me give you the 4 lessons that God kind of pointed out to me. These are 4 lessons from the past that would probably bless women today. The first lesson is beauty cannot be ruined from the outside, and ugliness is a choice. It's not a curse, it's a choice. And so is feminine grace and modesty. Those are choices as well. Now, we don't know most of these words, so I'm going to go over them. Beauty is the perfection of God's artistry. In it is the message of life and love and hope and endurance, and that message is etched not in words, it's etched in form. There are things that are so beautiful, like looking at a sunset. It's so beautiful that just looking at it speaks a wordless message deep inside of you. And it tells you about God, and it tells you about his goodness, and it tells you about life and love and hope. And it stirs up endurance and courage. It makes men more courageous. It puts fire in their belly to fight for life. It awakens and it strengthens and it pulls family together. Beauty is this incredibly powerful thing. And unfortunately, most of us, we just think beauty, we think sexiness, because that's what our culture did. It diminished it so much. Beauty is something that speaks on a deep level when people see it. It touches them in a deep inward way. And there's external beauty and there's internal beauty. Sometimes I think we make too much of it. It's 2 sides of the same coin. Just like with a man, there's external strength and there's internal strength. But show me some man who's weightlifting, who's all jacked up, but he's a coward inside. I don't see strength there. I see a lie. And a woman who has no inner beauty, but she's chalked up with makeup, getting plastic surgery, I don't see beauty there. I see a lie. In the same way, you could see a woman, and you see this sometimes, you'll see a woman who's old, and we're all going to get old and gray and wrinkly, and we're all on there. Like, I would love this, like, be strong on the outside. That's good for a man. Be like, be strong, guys. I want you to be strong on the inside, but be strong on the outside. Lift some weights, be able to pick up your kids if there was a fire and run, be able to do something. But I also understand that one day we're all going to be 80 years old. And we're probably going to have trouble opening a can of pickles, That's the future for guys. So what? Invest in the internal strength too, because that's what won't leave you, and that's what you're going to depend on more and more as you go. And there's something about, you see an older man who is strong inside, and he's usually still strong on the outside for an old man. He's not going to be able to fight a 30-year-old guy, but he's still strong. And there's the same thing you'll see with women is when they're working on that internal beauty. And I think it sounds cheap. It's all, oh, she has a pretty personality or something. I get that. But really, when there's a woman that has grace, when she has integrity, when she has strength, when she has that understanding of her value, there's something that's unshakable with that. And even later on, when they're old and gray, I remember seeing my grandmother once. She got dressed up for, they ran away, kind of eloped when they were like 16 years old, you know? And so I think it was their 50th anniversary. It was they were getting on in years, and they finally had their big wedding. And I remember her going down in the white dress and getting married at that moment. She's a beautiful bride. You know, there was something glowing and strong and beautiful in the midst of that situation. And it is this thing we're talking about. It's hard to put a word on it. It's like when we talk about strength for a man, it's hard not to make that a physical thing. And part of it is physical, but it's also talking about what God puts inside of a person. And God puts inside of women beauty. And it's this incredibly powerful thing. I remember there was a time in my marriage where I was just bombed out and I was having a really hard time. And there is no words. No words were going to help me. There was no encouragement. I was just like, I'm just staring at the wall. I was in Africa. I was just burnt out, beyond burnt out. And I was watching my wife in her like frumpy clothes, you know, she would call it, like, there's just whatever. It's hot. It's like a swamp inside of our house. And, but she was singing and cooking at the same time. And the music of her voice, and that she was taking an ugly world and she was putting curtains on it, and she was taking gross boiled chicken jarred in a can and she was making a meal out of it. And everything she was doing, she was bringing beauty to bear, even in herself. She took a silent, stuffy house and she put music into the air, and there was just little touches of beauty everywhere, and all I had to do was just sit there. And it was one of the times in my life I was really cognizant of the effect of it, of what she can bring into a room without doing or saying anything really. That beauty just sort of revived me and reminded me, you have things that are worth fighting for, and you have things worth defending. And I've been, and you know, you get sensitized to it as a man, and I've seen her do it with other women. I've seen her do it with our kids, where it's just being that pulls people together. It's the glue of society. You ever see guys getting together? The problem is there's no beauty in that situation. After a month hunting or something, we're just like, why would we want to live through winter to be with you? Why would I want to be? It's, you know, it's gross. Like if you're in a military barracks or whatever, like it needs a woman's touch. What is that? It needs purpose. It needs a reminder of the good side, that life isn't just a battle. There are the things we are fighting for, and women are ambassadors of the things that are worth fighting for. That's what beauty is all about. Beauty that God gives cannot be ruined from the outside, but man, are they going to try. And the thing that most women don't know but are in these stories is it's not usually a man who's going to try to destroy your beauty. It's another woman. It's usually going to be an evil stepmother. Don't get caught up on the exact picture of that. Just get the basic idea of it. There's going to be a woman that's going to try to come in a maternal, mothery way and poison you with her words and tell you things and push you into a position you don't belong in, get you cleaning up, and she's going to try to shame you into this hole. She wants to take your beauty. She can't. She wants to destroy your beauty. She can't. What she can do is get you to live below it, get you to do something to the beauty that God has given you. That's really the only way that she can win that fight. The other form of evil that we see popping up in the stories is the stepsisters. There's always multiple ones, because when it's women your age, they need to gang up on you to have enough authority. The older woman can just be by herself. The ones that are your age or younger, they have to gang up in a group and they all have to sort of chant it together to get it in your head. You're ugly, you're fat, you're stupid, you're too fat, you're too skinny, you're too this, you're too that. And they have to come in and they have to try to crush it. Beauty cannot be ruined by that. And ugliness is a choice. It's a choice that, for example, Cinderella never made. She could have chosen to be ugly in response. She could have chose to fight back the way she was being fought, to try to make other women ugly, to try to lift herself out of that situation. She could have threw ashes and soot on her mean sisters, and she could have tried to sabotage her mother or do all these things, but she refused to make the choice to be the ugliness that they were claiming she already was. She refused to be ugly. Instead, she chose grace, which is again to behave according to the beauty you have, even when nobody gives you credit, even when everyone's saying the false witness that you're ugly or you're a horrible person or you're a terrible mom or you're a terrible wife or you're this or that, to say, well, I know what God has said and I know what I'm living up to, and I'm not going to wear that. I'm not going to dignify that. And to walk through that situation with the grace. She walked around like she was a princess when she was cleaning toilets. That's victory. That's victory. I don't need to go and do some big thing to prove it. I know it's true. The other thing she chose was modesty. I think this is a word that most of us really do not understand. Grace for a woman is to be able to remain and display her beauty when she's falsely judged, when she's treated like she's ugly, when she's not. To be able to stand there and believe in your beauty when nobody else does, that is strength for a woman. For a man, it's to stand up and be courageous when everything's saying that you're a coward and you can't handle it, and to go out and fight anyways. For a woman, it's to stand there and be beautiful when you know they're not going to judge it fairly. They're going to make fun of it. They're going to tear it down. You're going to sing and they're going to laugh at you and you're going to want to run away. But a real woman would what? She would stand there and continue to sing because she knows it's beautiful and she knows there's somebody out there that needs to hear it. There's somebody out there that needs to see it. Even if they make fun of me, I'm still going to do it. I'm going to stand up. That is that feminine grace, that giving, even when the response is incorrect. Modesty, I think, it's sort of like if you gave a chief virtue to being a man, I'd say it's courage. Almost everything that a man needs to do can get boiled down. Really, you need courage in this situation. You need to face this. You need to walk into it. For a woman, it's modesty, but I think you got to explain it because most of us don't understand. We think modesty, we think it's like being a prude or something, like buttoned up to your neck. Or what modesty is it is a respect and a reverence for the gift of beauty that God has given you specifically. You have a sense of what God has given you, the beauty of your presence, what you can bring to other people, how you can beautify the world around you just by being you in it. The sense of the gift of your presence. It's very hard. It's something that fathers really have to protect in their daughters, and most fathers have done a terrible job of it. It's something that mothers should nurture, teach their daughters to find pride and joy in what they can bring into a room. Most of the time, mothers are trying to teach, well, you can be so creative or so useful. You're such a good organizer. You're such a good planner. They're trying to give some compilation prize instead of saying you're beautiful. You are just having you in the room is enough. If you know what it is and you know how to, just being here is enough. You lift everyone's spirits with your smile, with how you talk, your graciousness. But we don't usually point that out nowadays. To have a respect and reverence for that leads to all the things we usually call modesty. Because if you really need to understand what modesty is, it's just protecting your beauty. It's realizing my beauty can't be destroyed from outside. It's going to be me that destroys it. It's going to be me that harms it. And I'm going to harm it in one of two ways. And these are one of the two temptations that's going to come. Either to sell my beauty cheap, wear a low cut top and try to like control some people, try to look good by sexualizing myself and giving my beauty away for nothing. That the enemy loves that. And women love to push each other that because they get to turn around and call her, you know what, behind her back. She's SLUT, right? like it'll blast you guys. But that's what it is, right? There's always a word like that in every culture. It's amazing women will encourage each other to act that way and then immediately turn behind their backs and tear it down. What are they doing? They don't really want you to show off your beauty. They want you to betray your beauty. They want you to sell it cheap. Can you imagine living in an old school culture and that was what you brought to the table, was your unsullied, untouched beauty. That's what you're bringing to the wedding feast. That's what you're bringing. And if there was a woman there saying, you should get out and get some experience, you should rack up that body count, girl, sleep around, and that, what are they really trying to do? They're trying to get you to destroy your own value. Sell yourself cheap, be a prostitute. Yeah, that's going to be real good treat yourself like a prostitute. That's going to be great for you. Can you imagine if someone was giving that counsel to to your daughter? You'd be like, get away. You don't know her. You don't know what she needs. I know what you're after. That's one way that modesty protects. The other way, we don't really get this. The other temptation to destroy beauty comes the exact opposite direction. Modesty teaches us to refuse to profane and desecrate the beauty that God gives, not to destroy it in wantonness, that is the cheaply sell beauty, and not to destroy it in what we might call frigidity, pointing to Frozen for an example where it's pretty obvious that that's what they're teaching. But what is it? It's the idea that beauty shouldn't even be there. It's not even that I'm going to sell it cheap. I'm going to turn it into this perverse. I'm not beautiful. I'm sexy and sexy. And what is that going to last past your 40s or 50s? No, it's not. So it's like you're going to imagine these young TikTok girls. They're putting all their self-worth into sexiness. What happens when gravity takes that away? What happens when that's not a factor anymore? They're going to Botox and they're just going to get more and more freakish, and it's terrible. If your idea of beauty was a little bit bigger, you would understand that's not where you want to put all the eggs in that basket. If you're beautiful, you're always going to be sexy. That's not going to be a problem for your husband. Be 80 years old, you can be wrinkly and gray and pop your teeth out. You're still going to be sexy to your husband if you're beautiful to him. But that's not going to be the case if you've traded it all away from that. And then the whole point is it gets used up. Now, what's the opposite of that? What's the other thing that modesty protects us from? It protects us from treating beauty as if it was of no account. Most girls will fall one way or the other. They'll be hyper promiscuous and they'll sell themselves cheap, or they'll completely despise the idea of beauty altogether. They'll just like, beauty isn't important. I'm useful. I'm good at planning. I got this. I do that. And they throw away the idea. I'm a doer now. That's what I do things, and I do things that are useful, and it's utilitarian. And you lose what? You lose the princess. Like the prince, pink and princess and it's like it's hating all those ideas because why? Because it was taken away from me. It's like a man that hates masculine things. Why? Because some guy came over and knocked him down and bullied him until he thought, I can never win a fight. I'll never win. I have to be smarter or craftier. I can't be stronger. I can't be braver. Those things don't work. Well, yes, they do. You've just been poisoned by somebody, broken in a way that you don't understand. You need to go out there and you need to face the things you need to face as a man and learn that that's part of your soul. In the same way, you can't really be the fullness of a woman and not believe in your beauty, not be able to walk through a Cinderella season where you're covered with ashes. Nobody believes in your beauty but you do believe in it and stand by it. That's where woman gets all of her fire. That's where she gets all of her power. That's what a young girl sees in an older woman and says, I want to be like that. It's not a low-cut top. It's not perfect features. It's that interior strength of beauty. It's knowing your value through and through. That's what turns every head in the room and continues to year after year, decade after decade, that you can build a family around that woman. Most people don't really get that into their spirit. They don't really understand That's what modesty is all about. It's about holding your beauty in such reverence that you would never sell it cheap. That's what we understand about modesty. Well, you don't want to sleep around, you don't want to show too much. But there's an equal part of modesty that says, but I need to bring my beauty into play. I can't give it away to everybody, but there's a certain level that I should bring everywhere I go. There's a certain level of beauty and beautification, which is what beauty does. It beautifies everything it touches. It's Midas's touch. You come in, not only are you beautiful, but the way you blossom makes that little girl that you're hanging out with blossom. That you are the queen or the princess that makes all the other girls and the princesses, that you walk around and you make those boys feel like knights that want to fight for something. And you go around and you do that everywhere. That's equally part of modesty, but we usually don't think of it that way. Modesty is framing the right thing, and it is the beauty that God has given you, and it's an incredibly powerful gift. There is something when a man stands up and does the right thing, no matter what. Every man in the room, it just catches in his heart. Every single man. That's why we watch movies like Braveheart, because there's some guy pretending to do that, and we all sit there and say, that's what we're all supposed to be doing, right? And there is something inside of every woman when they see a girl stand up and believe in the beauty that God has given her. When there's enemies around and there's such a fight to be had to stand there, and she believes and she puts herself out there, and she knows that the right guy's going to see it, that the right guy's going to come running, that there is someone who's going to fight for that because it's so valuable. The confidence my little daughter has at her age to run out and know that if she says Sharptooth's attacking, the dad's going to run in and fight off the imaginary dragon or dinosaur and scoop her up because of the beauty she brings to my day. She knows she brings it, that her giggle does, that her hair flowing behind her head as she runs around laughing does. That's what all women have. And injured women who don't think they have it have a tendency to go and hurt other women and try to break that in them and just pass on the curse. That's what these stories speak so powerfully to. That's a choice. Ugliness, real ugliness, is trying to destroy beauty. That's where it comes from. I'm gonna squish that. Maybe you think you're doing that young girl a favor, teacher. That life isn't about that. It's about being an ugly Cinderella and being really good at cleaning fireplaces. Be the best fireplace cleaner. That's how you become successful in this world. Neither you nor that little girl is going to find any fulfillment there. The second lesson, the first one again, is beauty cannot be ruined from the outside. Ugliness is a choice, and so is grace and modesty, to honor that beauty within you. Number two, there are fairy godmothers and cooks who will switch out your kids for lambs when the ogre comes around. There are these good women, these god women, these godmothers, these god sisters out there. And there are also the evil stepmothers and the evil stepsisters. The second lesson is that you need other women in your life, but you need to make sure you're going to the right ones. And sometimes there's switcheroos that happen. Your mother used to be a wonderful lady, but there was something about you becoming a woman that soured her to you in a way that's inappropriate. Maybe she thinks she's helping you. Maybe there's other women in your family. Maybe it's women at work. They think you're a protege and they're trying to lift you up. It could be 100 different relationships like that. But there are women who are going to come into your life and they will ravage you. They will destroy. They will lead you down the path to self-destruction. And there are women in your life who are like those fairy godmothers that will come along when everybody else has decided you're not worth it and you're not pretty and you're not beautiful. And what the heck worth are you? And you suck at everything you do. The whole world's standing up and throwing mud. And there will be women that come along and say, I still see it. You need to see it. You need to fight. You need to stand up for who you are and what you have. They need you. You have a person in your life, they come around every once, they need you. Your husband needs you. Your kids need you. And you go, I can't see it, but the truth rings in my heart when you say it. We have to choose the people that we open our hearts to. It's like Joseph in the Bible. You got to share who, you got to choose who you're going to share those dreams with. Some people, they get invited to the housewarming. They don't get invited to the planning stage because they're not going to do anything nice with it. They're just going to come and poison the dream all the way along. Invite them after you've won. They can come and have a look after it's done. And there are some people that you need to pull them close. Say, hey, maybe I've been keeping you at a distance, and I realize you're one of the only really great women that I know. You're one of the only women I really want to be like when I grow up, you know? And I just want to open the doors and invite you in because I need your voice in my life. I need God to use you in my life. It's amazing. There are women that have been in trouble for a long time. If you really looked at it, you go, well, when you're in trouble, you always go to these people. You have a history of these people hurting you, but you always run back to them. And it's like, well, it's because it's what? It's my aunt, it's my mom, it's my friend from high school. We were friends since we were 14. There's some reason behind it. It just doesn't really hold water when you look at the fruit of the situation. Who is the fairy godmother in your life, or the fairy godmothers? Maybe you're lucky, like Sleeping Beauty, you got 7 of them maybe. But who are they? And recognize them for who they really are. Sorry, we got 2 more here. The third one is beauty can be injured. It can be driven into unconsciousness. I see so many women nowadays, and I think that their beauty has been driven so deep undercover. They go, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I believe in this beauty stuff. You know, what is that? That's so misogynist. Like I'm just a trophy or something. No. Go give that speech to a 2-year-old little girl spinning in a dress. Smash that before you smash it for yourself. You'll never do it. You'll look at it, I'd be a monster to do that. Obviously, she's not a trophy because she's spinning around in her dress feeling beautiful. Obviously, there's something natural and wonderful going on there. And if it's good for her, it was good for me when I was 2 years old. Maybe it's still good for me. Maybe what happened was that when I was first learning to weave the flax, I was injured. Some evil lady came across me and she stuck a knife in my heart and she said or did something horrible. Maybe all the girls in middle school or high school, they came after me and they laughed at me and they tore me down and they made me feel ugly, and it drove my beauty undercover. They can't destroy your beauty, but they can get you to be afraid to show it, afraid to put it out there because it might get more laughter and more attack. So you bury it, you make it go to sleep deep inside of you. And maybe it was almost forgotten. And then you met Robert, then you met Danny, then you met some guy who looked at you and all of a sudden, wait, what is, I remember that feeling. When you see a guy's eyes light up because it's you. And you can pretend you're not beautiful. You can swallow that lie, but it's hard to believe it when another person is coming to life because of it. When your husband is shining, and I know a few years of marriage you can fall in the patterns, but certainly when you first met, the hunger in his eyes, the desire, the fact that you did just take his day from, oh, it was a terrible day, and then I came home to you and it all got better. There's something about that that can awaken the sense of the beautiful. It's a moment in your life where you can say, I remember this and I want it back. That injury, if it doesn't get healed, if that splinter doesn't get pulled out, you will fall back into it. That beauty will go back to sleep. It'll wake up again when you have a little kid, because that little kid's going to have the same thing. There's nothing to make that kid's day okay except mama. Except when he runs in, you hold him and all of his tears dry and everything gets better. That's why it's so addictive to be a mother. It's so hard to let go sometimes, because maybe that's the only place you can touch your beauty anymore. And that just means there's an injury there that you're pretending isn't there. There's a part of, there's an injury, there's something that hurts so bad, you just want to make it go to sleep, but you're so starving for it the rest of the time. And little safe moments like that show you there's something worth digging up in your heart and bringing back to life. To let that love start to work that injury to the surface, to let God in to heal it. I have a lot more experience working with guys, but it's the same thing. They tried to be a man. They were following the movies. They were going to be a hero, and then some bully, some jerk, it's usually the dad, but I mean somebody comes along and freaking hurts them, and they just give up, and they try to bury that part of themselves. Their courage sleeps, and they become these passive little Casper milquetoast people. But there will be moments in their lives when it's awoken, when that hunger for strength and courage and for the battle wakes up inside of them. And you have to go, don't you want it? When it's there, when you're not pretending it's not there, but when it's there, don't you want it enough to start chasing a healing? Because that's the thing. You can sleep through it. You can put it back to sleep. You can forget that beauty's there. You can forget that it's an important part of your life, or you can say, God, I want you to restore me. I don't want to be Cinderella. I made peace with being Cinderella. I'm not supposed to be her. I'm not supposed to be the scullery maid covered in dust. I'm supposed to be, as cheesy as it sounds, the royalty. I'm supposed to be the beauty that makes elegant the space that I'm in. That just coming and hanging out with me makes a difference in people's day. The fourth point's a long one, but I'll put it this way. For women, and the Bible says this, it's a little bit convoluted, but it says women shall be saved through childbearing, which sounds very old school. But I'll put it this way. For women, salvation happens in the context of being what I call the lady of the house. It means that you become, in all meaningful ways, a wife and a mother. It means that you're running your house under God, under your husband. And the truth is that being a good disciple of Jesus and being good at being a woman are side by side roads. You can't deviate from one without leaving the other. You can't be like, I want to be a good disciple of Jesus, but I'm going to throw away what it has meant to be a woman for all these thousands of years. I'll throw that away. I'm going to go be a Fortune 500 CEO who never sees my kids, and it's on my fifth divorce. But I'm gonna try to be a disciple of Christ. It's not going to work. It's the same way that I can't throw away what it means to be a man, be some soft, effeminate weakling, and then try to be a disciple of Christ and have that mean anything. The paths are parallel. For me to be a man of God, I got to be a man. For you to be a woman of God, you have to be a full woman. That means you have to believe in yourself enough to go to the ball. That means you have to be willing to be dressed up like a princess and stand up in front of everyone and know there's going to be snickers and know there's going to be people rooting for you to fail the whole time. There are going to be people sabotaging you, trying to get you to fail. And here's your beauty on display. And the last thing you want to do is have people laugh at you, but they are. But you never get to stand at the top. You never actually get the throne. You never actually get to where you're supposed to go if you can't have the faith to believe what God has given you, no matter what the rest of the world says. At some point, and it's true for a little girl, it doesn't matter what anybody else says to Maggie. I tell her every day she's beautiful, and nothing can touch that. Do you realize that's part of the relationship with God that he wants to give you? That you can go into a place and have the Father look at you and be absolutely captivated by the beauty that you have. To say, you are the thumbprint of my glory on this creation. You are the evidence of my artistry. You're the painting that I made to remind everybody I'm still here and life is still good. And if you can really accept God into that fatherly position, then you can live off of that, even if the whole world decides to lie and say the opposite. Salvation happens within that context, especially for a woman. You can't be a good disciple of Jesus and reject what it means to be a woman from a traditional and biblical perspective. For a man, a lot of our salvation happens in mission. You'll see a man, I got to go out there and I got to go right to the edge where the darkness is, where the scary things are. I got to go out there and do that because that's where God's going to meet me. That's where Jesus is going to work. the Holy Spirit into my heart and deal with the things inside of me. I have to go and I have to face the test. That's what I have to do as a man. That's where God's going to put the cross on me the most. For a woman, it all happens in community. You can't live your life like Elsa the Ice Queen saying, I'm going to run away from everything and I'm going to freeze myself out and I'm going to freeze my heart and I'm going to run from everything that makes me feel alive and I'm going to go hide and do my duty until it's over and they're never going to see me cry and they're never going to hurt me and I'm going to hide everything. No, it's the wrong direction. You got to thaw yourself out. You got to bloom. You got to do it in front of your enemies. You got to trust God. You got to trust the people that God has given you to protect you enough to be able to take that risk. Because that's exactly where God's going to deal with it all. I can't help a man who's not ready to chase the scary things at the edge of darkness. That's the only way I can build up courage inside of him. And there's no way to help a woman who's not willing to take her beauty and put it where her mouth is, to bet it all, to put it in the middle of the table and chase it in the scary places. That's where the cross is going to be applied in her life. And a big part of that is if you rise up to be the lady of your house, to be that pinnacle of beauty, to be that standard that her daughters measure themselves against, that her boys will raise up against their future wives and say, is she a real woman? My mom taught me what that is. To be the lady of the house. That's why there's that second part of Sleeping Beauty. It's not enough she became a wife and a mother. When she stood up to become the head of the house, when she stood up to be queen, there's always an ogre that's going to pop up right then. And they're going to come after your kids. And then they're going to come after you. I thought the ogre was such a powerful image because it's a powerful, somewhat masculine, and cannibalistic woman. She's in the family. She's in a position of power. And she wants to feed on women and children she perceives as weak or vulnerable to her advances. She's afraid of the men getting involved. So she's going to run it very subtly. She's going to pull you aside, say you have to do this. It's always going to be some legality of being in the household. You got to go, well, they asked you to do this. This part of being the family, you're going to go over there and I'm going to watch the kids and I'm going to do that. And there's little manipulations where they lawyer around family pressures or business. It could be in different spheres, but in this one, it's family. It's being part of the royal household. I'm the royal mother. She's not an authority. This is the queen. She's the queen. The queen can say, well, I'm not, you're going to go do that. She could flip it around in a second if she stood on her authority. There's always going to be somebody who wants to tear you down. I don't think there's ever been a woman who stood up and become the head of her house, been a lady of the house, that was not attacked and repelled. Someone didn't try to stop them. Especially, I've never seen it out, somebody in the family on one side or on both sides didn't try to stop them. You stand up and saying, this is my family and this is how it's going to go. I'm the lady of the house. There's going to be trouble. And God will lead you through that. And on the other side of it is respect from all the women who have eyes to see for standing in the right place. And most importantly, an answer to that question that I see on my daughter's face every day, that's on every woman's face if you look closely enough, which is, am I beautiful? Do I deserve to be here? Do I deserve the position in this family I've been given? Do I deserve this man? Do I deserve these kids? Do I deserve these friends? And I can tell you, it won't mean anything, but I could tell you the answer is a resounding yes. But you know whether that is a question that's still pending. It's a question that can only be answered when you stand on it, when you risk it, when you put it out, when you believe in it, when God says you're beautiful and you are worth it and you make such a difference here and you stand up and you defend that. Whether that looks like Cinderella scrubbing out the fireplaces and taking the hits as they come and not letting it shake her, or whether that's like sleep, or like at the end of Cinderella where she goes to the ball and she stands tall, dressed like a princess and dances with her, whatever the externals of it are, until you stand on it. face the storm and pass through, that question will still be a question. And whether you look at a man when it comes to, do I have the strength to handle what life's going to throw? Can I be the wall that stands up and protects my family? Will I come through when they need me? There's no way a man can live. You can tell him a million times God's made you strong enough, but he has to go out and face something really scary. He's really got to stand there and let God use him and get that confidence. And in the same way, until you know that you are the perfect tool to empower and strengthen and inspire your husband, to empower, strengthen, and bless your family, to be a cog in the mechanism of the women in your life, that you are part of the pillars of womankind around you, in your family, in the church, that you can be someone that lifts up the next generation and helps them find out who they're supposed to be. Until that is decided in a actual situation in your life, it'll always be a question mark, and it's the kind that haunts so many people in our culture today. We have all these cheap band-aids. They don't really work. So if I can set our minds on this stuff in closing, for women, salvation happens in the context of community and family. It's you bringing Jesus into that that's really going to chase out the demons and prove the question of who is king over your life, whether it's Jesus or something else. It's not going to be all these. I mean, I've seen women, they would give everything to Jesus except the decisions about family, except what's going on in their marriage, because they know that's where their heart is. They know that's the scariest stuff is going to be right there. For a man, again, it's going out there and facing a mission. It's a missional. It's very different. They're complementary. But I think a lot of times in the church, especially when it's men like me preaching, is we could give a false impression of where the battle is in women's lives. And I do want to set you guys on the battle, not because I think you guys are failing in marriage or failing with kids. I look around at the marriages here, I'm impressed. I look around at the kids compared to the kids. I see a lot of other kids and man, our kids are doing good. I know you guys are probably harder on yourself than that. I don't point out these battlegrounds to you because I'm worried about the battlegrounds. I point out the battlegrounds to you because I'm worried what happens if you never go out there and face the demons. How long those lies will live eating at you if you stay in the shadows. It's there that you're going to shine, and it's there that those lies are going to be tested and refuted. And it's there that you're going to shine and find the joy that you tasted to some degree as little girls. And it's the Father's heart in me that is waking up slowly as I go along, that I want that for my daughter, but more than that, I want her to see it all around her. I want to see it for myself. I want my son to have a field of wildflowers to walk out in the midst of, to find the perfect one for him. But even after he picks her, to be surrounded by women who are everything that God wanted them to be shining like that. I think that's the glory of God, is mankind fully alive. And it'll never be right if Cinderella's still in the basement sweeping the floors. It just doesn't happen there. There's a beauty, there's a greatness in every woman, just like there is a strength, there's a warrior in every man. And if Jesus didn't break the chains to let you get that, then it would be less than salvation. It would be an insult to God to pretend that his salvation doesn't reach that far. It reaches right to the fulfillment of your heart. So if you've been making do, stop it. God wants you to aim a whole lot higher than that in your life. And I can say for one that that's what this church is about. Anything, that's what it's about. I want you guys to be able to stand tall in the kingdom and shine with everything that God has given you. And I'll be cheering you. from the stands on that one for sure. Lord, I thank you for all these wonderful ladies that you've put in my life and all the lessons you've taught through them. I thank you for my incredible wife, for my wonderful daughter, and for all of our friends. Friends you've given my wife, friends you've given my daughter, friends you've given to me. And God, I've had seasons where I have groaned and wept in my heart for what has been done to our sons, and I've had times where I've groaned and wept in my heart for what has been done to the women in our culture. It's so horrendous. It can make you really hate the devil. It was truly right to do so. God, I just pray for salvation right there. Hosanna, God, right there. That you would begin to awaken healing, that you begin to awaken hunger for wholeness. That some of us were like the man laying on the mat year after year, 38 years, waiting for healing that he knew was just out of reach. That's where it's comfortable to make do, to survive, to scrape by one more day. And what was it that Jesus said to him? Do you want to be well? Are you still hungry to be whole? Do you remember what it is to be that little girl spinning in her dress, or to be that young bride absolutely captivating her husband, to be that young mother whose baby stares up at her with eyes in complete awe of the beauty that has been given her? Do you want to bring that out and bring it to maturity and fullness and all the great things God can use that for? How desperately our age needs real women, women of God, the ladies of our houses. God, that you'd awaken the desire in the eldership and the teachers and the leaders of our church to chase that. That you awaken the hunger in us husbands to protect that, to make space for that, to fight for that. But most of all, that you would stir the hearts of these women to want it for themselves, to know they're worthy of it, to know they're called to it, that anything less than chasing it would be disobedience, be throwing away a gift that God worked so painstakingly to give them, sitting there wrapped under the tree, just to take it and throw it in the garbage instead of unwrapping it and using it. What a travesty. To awaken that hunger in them, that's what I pray for today. And bless the rest of our time together as a church. Bless our kids. Protect us from injury. Allow us to have a good time together today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And if one of you wouldn't mind hitting the button.